our stream. Waiting. I think it'll come. We'll start our prayer. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the many who are attending our satsangs online, either in person or with recording. Let me just check. Everything is running fine here. Looks good. So we have actually a lot more questions than usual, so I apologize in advance if we don't get to your particular question. We'll also alternate between online questions and local questions. Of course, there are many more online students than there are here, so we'll focus more on the online. First question comes from Jared, who lives in Ottawa, in Canada. He's watched my videos on psychology of samadhi. In fact, in last week's satsang, we talked about that series. And he asks, is samadhi different than enlightenment? Samadhi is a meditative experience. Meditative experiences come and go. Enlightenment doesn't come and go. So you can have samadhi and not be enlightened. You can have samadhi and be enlightened. It's that relationship is not necessary. And the next question is samadhi necessary for enlightenment? What? No. Samadhi is an experience, and no particular experience is necessary for meditation, is necessary for enlightenment. I would say samadhi itself is not necessary, but meditation in general most certainly is. Meditation is crucial to prepare your mind for enlightenment. But samadhi, by the way, Patanjali actually gets into some details, 7 different kinds of samadhi. We're not going to get into all those details here. I studied that very thoroughly, and based on my own experience and based on all the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, a particular experience, actually my guru also focused on this a lot, no particular experience, no special experience is necessary for enlightenment, since enlightenment is recognition of your true nature. Your true nature is already present, but not fully recognized as it is, which means your true nature is already present in your experience. It's not absent from your experience. Your true nature is consciousness. Consciousness is present in your experience right now. No further experience is necessary. What is necessary is to remove the so-called veil of ignorance, which obscures the true nature of that consciousness. So enlightenment, Shankara says again and again, jnanameva mokshaha. Liberation is a result of removing that so-called veil of ignorance. You can have samadhi and remain ignorant, no problem. No problem at all. All right, next question from Gordon, who lives in Glasgow. And Gordon asks, ignorance is said to have no beginning, correct? Was there a beginning to one's not being able to speak Russian? He gives as an example. And the reason there's no beginning is if your ignorance about Russian language had a beginning, then before the beginning of that ignorance, you would know how to speak Russian. So anyway, for ignorance to have a beginning, it should follow a different state. And the state that's different from ignorance is knowledge. How can the state of ignorance follow knowledge. So this is our logic to establish that ignorance, and in this case, ignorance of your true nature as Satchitananda, has no beginning. However, he says, Gordon says, this seems to me to contradict the idea that ignorance is a positive superimposition rather than ignorance of something in particular. So this is a complexity that many people don't appreciate. And ignorance has two primary features. One is that ability to cover, that non-recognition, and then the second is what Gordon is referring to, the superimposition. Let me illustrate with our famous example of the rope snake. Advaita Vedanta is famous for that example. You all know it well. So when did you gain ignorance of the rope? Even before you went in the alley, you were already ignorant of the rope. That ignorance, the non-recognition of the rope, had no beginning. But there was a moment at which you superimposed the snake. That happened in time. That superimposition had a beginning and has an end. But the point is, these are two different aspects of ignorance. The first is called avarana shakti, the capacity of ignorance to obscure or prevent you from recognizing what's already present. That avarana shakti is beginningless. The second, actually, I shouldn't say that, that the shakti, yeah, we'll leave that be. The second is vikshepa shakti, which is the capacity of ignorance to project, in this case, projecting the snake upon the rope, or projecting your nature as a body and mind upon Satchitananda Atma. Those kinds of wrong conclusions happen in the mind at a particular point in time. So we want to differentiate the effects of these two aspects of ignorance. One is this covering aspect, which is related to that beginningless ignorance, and the other is the projecting aspect, which is more connected to the mind making mistakes, basically. Ignorance is eternal. Mistakes happen in time, if we want to differentiate it like that. Next question from Arun. Arun lives in Bangalore, and he asks, with regard to the Bhagavad Gita chapter 8, which is all about death, antakalecha mam eva, the verse he quotes is, at the last moment of your life, whatever your mind is thinking about at that moment, in that direction you travel after death. It's a very elaborate description of that process in chapter 8. So whatever is the condition of your mind at the time of death will determine where you go in your future lives. My question is that at the time of death, body is going through a painful process, might indeed be, and the mind might be overwhelmed by emotions, very possible. What is the probability of remembering Krishna in such circumstances? Possibility is dim indeed, unlikely. But chapter 8 is one of the chapters that really gets misunderstood in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, basically, Sri Krishna gives you two ways of dealing with death, an easy way and a hard way. And what he gives you in chapter 8 is the hard way. This is, he describes the death of a great yogi. A yogi is one who has trained his or her mind throughout life so that at the moment of death, the yogi has sufficient control of the mind to keep it focused on Krishna. The yogi is capable of doing that. I don't think I'll be able to do that at the moment of death. So there's an easy way and hard way. The hard way is described in chapter 8. The easy way is described through the rest of the Bhagavad Gita, and that is gaining knowledge of Sri Krishna's presence within you, and gaining that knowledge not at the time of death, now, and having that knowledge with you throughout without your life. That's the easy way. This is a little brief explanation. If it's not clear, it'd be helpful perhaps to watch my videos on chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. I explain this in quite some detail. So again, chapter 8 gives you the yogi's approach to death, which is something I think few of us, certainly not me, can accomplish that. Next question here from Malar, who lives in Tamil Nadu, South India. He says, one of my doubts is, what is an individual according to Advaita Vedanta? We all reflect the one consciousness, absolutely correct. So what comprises the individual? We've discussed this on several times, several occasions. The consciousness plus mind as a minimum. There are other ways of defining it, but it's your mind that imparts individuality to your consciousness. Right now, for example, you might feel consciousness is stuck inside your mind, inside your body, inside your head, etc. That conclusion that consciousness is stuck inside your body and mind, that conclusion is in your mind, not in your body. That conclusion is in your mind. So the mind with its conclusion with its wrong conclusion about consciousness, the mind in the presence of consciousness is the individual. The individual being is the one with a mind. Let me rephrase that. An individual being is a conscious being with a mind, and one more factor, with ignorance. Ignorance of your true nature as Satchitananda Atma, which allows you to identify with body and mind. In more detail, I think there's a series, Introduction to Vedanta. We'll talk about this particular topic in some more detail. Next question here. This is from Shobha, who lives in Portland. My question is on a statement in the Upanishad that says, existence depends on knowability. First of all, that statement, existence depends on knowability, is not from the Upanishad. It's in English. I'd need to see the exact Sanskrit to know what the reference is to. It doesn't sound right, and maybe it's an improper translation. I'm not sure. What is taught in the Upanishads don't teach that existence depends on knowability. The Upanishads do teach that existence and knowability are two features of the ultimate reality. That which exists, let me be less abstract. You, in your true nature, you exist and you are conscious. By the way, this knowability is not quite the right, I think there might be a mistranslation. The word knowability, I'm sure, in proper context, refers to consciousness. Existence and consciousness come together as a unit. They're inseparable. There can be no existence without consciousness. There can be no consciousness without existence. Now, if you say, what about the existence of a rock? Fine. How do you know that there's no consciousness in it? Prove it. If we understand consciousness to pervade the universe, how do you keep all pervasive consciousness out of the rock? So Consciousness is in the rock. It's not manifest. It's not reflected. Manifest is a better term here. So consciousness is in the rock, but it doesn't manifest itself. Consciousness is in this body. It does manifest itself. And that consciousness exists. So existence and consciousness go together. But if this comes from the Upanishad, I would need to see the exact Sanskrit words. This sounds like an incorrect translation, which led Shobha to make a wrong assumption. Isn't this statement anthropomorphic, a view of existence? That is knowable to human beings. I don't think knowable is meant to be anthropomorphic in any sense. I think knowable refers to consciousness. But again, I would need to see the exact Sanskrit. I'll take another one here. This is Jay, who lives in New York City. Is our next birth determined directly by our actions in this life, or from a random assortment of good and bad karmas from previous lives? And this is another good. Our students here are answering your question and answering it correctly. And the correct answer given was yes. Nice. Very good. So from a random assortment of good and bad karmas from previous lives, that's a reference. The doctrine of karma is a little bit technical, but it says that we have an accumulation of karma from an infinite number of prior lives. That infinite accumulation is called sanchita karma. And that sanchita karma is indeed I don't know, I guess you could call it a random assortment. I'm not sure. I wouldn't call it a random assortment. It's an assortment. I don't think we can necessarily say it's random. It is the result of the good and bad deeds you've done in infinite number of prior lives. That we call sanchita karma. But that sanchita karma includes the karma you do in this life. That is, whatever karmas you do in this life, those karmas which have not yet yielded their results, those unfructified karmas become part of your sanchita karma, and therefore they will, to some extent, affect you in your next life. But I would answer Jay's question in a very different way. He concludes, if everything is really determined by your sanchita karma, Jay asks, why do good in this life if I fail to reach enlightenment? If I'm not enlightened and my actions in this life have no big consequence in the big picture in future lives, then why should I do good things in this life? That's a good question, and I think we should understand it clearly. Again, let's make sure we understand this point. Assuming that you don't get enlightened in this life, what's the point of following dharma if you know that whatever harmful deeds you commit in this life will not directly affect your immediate coming life? And in fact, if you understand the doctrine, by the way, to understand the doctrine of karma properly, better to watch those series of videos on my YouTube channel. But what happens mathematically is that the karmas from this life that are unfructified, they get metaphorically dumped into your sanchita karma and diluted by your sanchita karma. And if you don't understand that principle, watch those videos. Anyway, it's an argument that might allow someone who believes in the doctrine of karma to say, there's no rule that says that my bad karmas in this life will make me suffer in my immediate next life. I'm going to live an infinite number of times, and whatever bad things I do will probably be spread among those infinite lives. So why should I follow dharma according to the doctrine of karma? Well, there are other reasons, and you can argue. You can make some kind of argument like that. And people like to argue, I get that. But I would say this is an argument based on the doctrine of karma. What about an argument based on your experience in this life right now? And that is to say, if you do a lot of terrible things in this life, you're going to suffer those consequences not only in future lives, you're going to suffer the consequences in this life also. Doctrine of karma does not say that whatever you do only affects your future lives. Doctrine of karma says the results come in two ways. Some results come immediately, some results come later, and we have no way of knowing. One thing we know for sure is that, and you all know this already, you know someone who has done many terrible things in life. Tell me, are they not reaping at least some of the consequences in this life? I think so. I don't think you could give me a legitimate example of someone who commits murder and doesn't pay some consequence for it. Suppose they don't get caught. Yeah? You don't think that person might feel some queasiness about committing murder? Of course, if a person is a psychopath, then that's a different thing entirely. That's an illness. That's a mental illness. We're talking about a person who is normal. A normal human being who's not a psychopath is going to suffer the consequences of their harmful actions in this life itself and in future life. And not either or, both and. Suffer now and suffer later. So I would say that the better argument is not the argument based on karma. The better argument is the fact that you will face consequences in this life itself. Okay, we'll take one more question because we've got so many online questions. We got many more than usual. I'm not even sure why. One more question. This is from Anand, who lives in New York. In New York City also, as did Jay. Question is about dharmashastra. In the Hindu tradition, we have many scriptures that define social and religious order. What should be done, what should not be done in a social setting and in a religious context. The Manu Dharmashastra is perhaps best known. Anand makes reference to the Apastamba Shastra, sutras actually. And he says, most dharmashastras were written for a time and place quite different than ours today. Absolutely true. Which means the relevance of a 1,000-year-old book of rules is not going to be very relevant today. Think about how rapidly things change, especially how rapidly things change today. Just many of you use computers all the time. Think of how much, if you're a Windows user, think of how much Windows has changed in the last decades. It's not the same thing. It keeps changing and changing. Suppose you have a book that describes how to use Windows, and it's Windows, was there a 3.1? 3.0? No, 3.1. Suppose you have a book, How to Use Windows 3.1. How's that going to help you today? Throw it out. So that's a fairly good analogy for the value of these dharmashastras. That leads to Anand's question. Are there still particular lessons that observant Hindus should draw from these dharmashastras and apply to daily life? Certainly. The basic principle you find in every dharmashastra, ahimsa paramo dharmaha, the universal principle of dharma, meaning to cause the least harm possible. You'll find that illustrated either in so many words, either literally or paraphrased. You'll find it in every Dharma Shastra. You'll find it many times in the Mahabharata. You'll find it in other scriptures as well. So you can maybe throw away the book on Windows 3.1, but you don't throw away Windows. You still need an operating system for your computer. In the same way, we can throw away all the details. Seriously, what is taught in these Dharmashastras are utterly irrelevant today. Dealing with marriages between castes, dealing with how to treat members of the lower castes, none of this has relevance in our modern lives. It's deeply embedded in this casteism of ancient times, and which would be harmful, in fact, in modern times. So set that all aside. The one thing you definitely want to hold on to from all of these Dharma Shastras is the basic principle of Dharma, which is ahimsa. Live in such a way in which you cause the least harm. Okay, we'll take some questions here. You'll need the microphone.
So I recently learned that protons are actually infinite, and they don't it's not that. So I always thought that there was nothing permanent and materially speaking. So anything on the outside is subject to decay and whatnot. But learning this kind of feels
protons decay.
I thought there was a reason. Oh, okay. So
protons
then
decay.
Okay. All right. Then it's irrelevant. My second question is.
That was easy.
No, I do have one more question though. So you know how you talked about once you're enlightened, right? So suppose you're enlightened, but dreams are a different order of magnitude, right? So in dreams, you could still suffer in dreams, correct? And
Sure.
So then, I don't know, isn't that kind of pointless being enlightened? Because then you can still suffer in some way, even though.
So what's so bad about suffering? If you're enlightened. If you're enlightened, now here I'll answer your question. If you're enlightened and you have a bad dream, so what? Okay. It's just a bad dream. Even you don't have to be enlightened. You have a bad dream, and you say, so what? It's only a dream. So it's not an impediment. You're absolutely correct, and it's something that I think many people might get confused about. If you're enlightened, you aren't necessarily enlightened in your dream. There's no rule. There's no rule. I mean, think about how haphazard our dreams are. Anything goes. So there's no rule that if you're enlightened, that you're going to be enlightened in a dream. There's no rule. So you correctly said that an enlightened person could conceivably suffer in a dream. So what? The enlightened person wakes up and doesn't take it seriously. Okay. Other questions here in back?
Swamiji, I get aham brahmasmi tattvamasi. Of course, I need tons of nididhyasana, but I get the general concept. But I have trouble with bhakti marga, bhakti yoga. If I'm Brahman, if that's my true nature, when I pray, who is praying, who is prayed to, and what's the purpose?
Okay. If you're really enlightened, you don't need to pray. There's a simple answer to your question. If you are truly enlightened, if you know tattvamasi, If you know your true nature is Satchitananda Atma, which is non-separate from Brahman, if you know that, then there's no purpose for prayer. That's it. But the fact that you're asking this question suggests to me that you're not quite enlightened. And why not? There are many obstacles to enlightenment. Many obstacles to enlightenment. And to remove those obstacles, we're going to need all the help we can get. So, just to I think, let me try to address your question a little bit more specifically. You correctly said, from the aspect of Brahman, there's no one to pray and no one to pray to, right? But who's asking the question right now is not Brahman. The one who's asking the question now is an individual person. An individual person who is probably not quite enlightened, an individual person who is struggling for enlightenment, an individual person who is this little speck of dust in a vast universe. And we are all products of Ishvara, and we all have a relationship with Ishvara, creator, created. So all of that becomes meaningful at a worldly level. From the level of Brahman, and this is a common confusion about Advaita Vedanta. From the level of Brahman, all that exists is Brahman. Sarvam kalvidam brahma. It says in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is only Brahman. And that statement has such force and universality, it means not even Ishvara exists. Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara, gone. There's no Jiva, there's no individual, there's no Jagat, there's no world, there's no Ishvara, there's no creator. At the level of Brahman, there's only Brahman. What happened to Ishvara? You know, and this is perhaps relevant to at least some of our online viewers, and that is, followers of ISKCON have been told that Advaita Vedanta is against Ishvara for having this perspective. But this perspective is the perspective of Brahman. It's not the perspective of Vedanta. From the perspective of Vedanta, you are an individual person who is created and sustained by Ishvara. That's Vedanta's perspective. It gets confused because Vedanta does say Ishvara, and this, we can go on for a long time on this. Vedanta does say Ishvara is less real than Brahman. Absolutely, says that. Ishvara is less real than Brahman. Doesn't say Ishvara doesn't exist. Doesn't say Ishvara is an illusion. In fact, Shankara's concept of Maya is much more subtle. Doesn't mean illusion at all. So, Ishvara is less real than Brahman, just like pot is less real than clay. This is Shankara's style of discussion. But watch this, and this is what really gets misunderstood. Even though Ishvara is less real than Brahman, Ishvara is as real as you and me. Here you go. Yeah. At a human level. The technical term is vyavaharika satta. At the level of this empirical world, we all have that relationship with Ishvara. Ishvara is not dismissed. That statement, sarva kalvidam brahman, is a statement of an absolute truth which establishes that Ishvara is less real than Brahman, but establishes simultaneously that Ishvara is as real as you and me. Okay, let's do take more questions here. Next question from Arju. Arju says, is it ever possible that machines endowed with artificial intelligence and machine learning become so capable that one day they become self-aware? Self-aware, just like human beings. Depends on what you mean by self-aware. Self-aware, right now, you can be self-aware. If I ask you, what are you thinking about right now? That's a kind of self-awareness. I think psychologists call it reflexive awareness. Your attention is turned away from the world, excuse me, and your attention is turned towards the function of your own mind. If that's what you mean by self-awareness, computers have always had self-awareness, which is to say that a computer program keeps an eye on other computer programs. That's always been there. Every operating system has an executive function which oversees all the other activities of all the other programs that are running as they are loaded and unloaded, as they execute and finish. So computers always have this executive function, like similar to reflexive awareness, thinking about our thinking. So computers have always had that. Now, if you ask, do computers have, if we set aside this term self-awareness, if Arju means Satchitananda Atma, is consciousness present in a computer? We talked about a rock before. If you can't prevent consciousness from pervading a rock, can you prevent consciousness from pervading a computer? Further, from the highest teaching of Advaita Vedanta, that consciousness is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma is one of the Mahavakyas that's not often enough quoted. It says that the underlying reality because of which everything exists, Brahman, is a conscious reality, not an inert reality. So if you say, why does the silicon exists? Because of Brahman. The copper in the wires exists because of Brahman. Every part and component in that computer exists because of Brahman. So does the computer possess consciousness like you and I possess consciousness? Yeah. If you ask, does a computer experience like you and I experience? That's where we get into trouble. Our experience as human beings is something unique and special. And what is unique and special is not consciousness. The same consciousness in me is the same consciousness in that computer chip, is the same consciousness in a fruit fly. It's the same consciousness. So where the uniqueness comes is in the nature of our minds. And given the complexity of our brains and complexity of our minds, there is the current level of computer hardware and software is not even touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of emulating the complexity of our brains and minds. By the way, just a side point, what's called artificial intelligence is not intelligent like you are. It's a different kind of intelligence. It's not a human intelligence. It's a mathematical intelligence, it's a statistical intelligence. It's not a kind of reasoned intelligence like human beings have. Maybe one day, I think it's possible if you were to argue, one day, hundreds of years in the future, will they have computers that can emulate exactly how brains and minds function? Who knows? Perhaps. Perhaps it's possible. But how does that affect us today? I don't think it has any relevance today. Okay, next question from Sajit. Sajit, a transition from non-recognition to self-recognition and the removal of ignorance from a mere information level where someone is well informed about it to a level to... Okay, let me paraphrase the question. How do you go from understanding the concept, I am Satchitananda Atma, to understanding it personally? How does that happen? So you've already understood, Vedanta says that the consciousness present in your experience right now is Satchitananda Atma. You have that information, which the word Sajit, by the way, Sajit lives in Dubai. And he correctly says it's information. You're well informed. Good. That information is not enlightenment. Then what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is when you see your... Actually, it's better to put it just in very simple terms. Atma is consciousness. Atma is limitless, unchanging consciousness, free from worldly suffering, is information. I am unchanging, limitless consciousness, free from worldly suffering, is enlightenment. And if I say, how does that take place? It takes place through the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. When you listen to these teachings, not in the third person, but in the first person, we've said in other sessions that these teachings are meant to lead you on a process of self-inquiry. These teachings are not intended to impart information, which is, we're used to teachings imparting information. These teachings are not for the sake of imparting information, but rather leading you on a process of self-inquiry. So when will that transition take place? When you perform the process of self-inquiry under the guidance of the Guru. The Guru can tell you how to do it and what to do. You have to do it. No one can make you enlightened. I can't make you enlightened. I can guide you. You have to make the recognition. No one can do it for you. All right. Next question from Juan Carlos. Lives in Miami. Recently, I found myself engulfed in anger. But for the first time in my life, even amidst that anger, Bhagavan, God, remained at the forefront of my thoughts, with anger following in second place. I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but anyway. A few days later, I came across the expressions, the ups and downs of spirituality, and I realized that I was experiencing a down day in my sadhana. When Prakriti, nature, life, throws you a curveball, leading you to a spiritual down day, what is the best way to navigate these moments? I think, by the way, that's really good if in the midst of your anger and frustration, there's still part of your mind which is a little detached from all of that angst, all of that intense emotion, and a little bit detached, and even focused on Ishvara and Bhagavan. That is great. Of course, at the beginning, that will be a little tenuous. It won't be very strong at first. It gets stronger and stronger as time goes along. So, and you're on the right path. But this Juan says, I came across the expression ups and downs of spirituality. I have a problem with that expression. Because what goes up and down is not spirituality. What goes up and down is your emotions, not spirituality. Spirituality is based on wisdom, on knowledge. It's not that your knowledge goes up and down or spiritual wisdom goes up and down. Our emotions certainly do go up and down. And that's normal. Absolutely normal for our emotions to go up and down. The key then is to cultivate your spiritual understanding, your understanding that you are consciousness fundamentally. You are a conscious being who is essentially unaffected by all these intense emotions, to go on cultivating that perspective, to make it more clear, more vivid, more abiding in your day-to-day experience. This is how we progress. To the extent, actually, the ultimate the ending point is when anger doesn't even get a chance to arise. You head it off, but there's a funny American expression, you head it off at the pass. This is a reference to, I think, the cowboys who were, fighting some kind of enemy, and they would go in and catch the enemy at the pass over the mountains. Anyway, and by the way, I explain these American metaphors because I think about 2/3 of our viewers aren't in this country. So heading them off at the pass means what? To a non-American. That's why I sometimes explain some of these Americanisms. So heading them off at the pass means catching the anger before it takes over. That's what it is. Anger is normal. But you can catch that anger before it catches you and starts to disturb your thinking. Okay, a couple more before we conclude today. This is a question from Om Prakash, I think from Nepal, if I remember right. When I see the world, I see duality. But per the wisdom of the rishis and your teachings, the world is non-dual. Before going on, do you think the rishis didn't see duality? Do you think I don't see duality? If I don't see duality, how can I teach? How can I hold on to this? How can I read emails? You get the point. So the rishis saw, in fact, what the rishis experienced in the world is like what you experienced. It's all duality. Experience takes place at the level of duality. Clear? Okay, let's continue with Om Prakash's question. I see, but as per the wisdom of the rishis and your teachings, the world is non-dual. In other words, everything is a product of consciousness, Brahman. I see no such materials out there in the world. I don't see Brahman out there in the world. But since consciousness or Brahman is nirguna, what is the reason for worldly materials to exist? Because consciousness doesn't participate with worldly materials. Okay, we have some fairly abstract questions. And just a comment here. We want to ground these abstract questions in our experience. And Om Prakash is trying to do that. He says, I see duality. Excellent. That is grounding it in experience. Now the question is, how can non-duality exist in spite of our experience of duality? And I hinted at the answer to that before, and that is experience takes place only at the level of duality. we need to, this is actually a very important topic in Advaita Vedanta. Experience takes place only at the level of duality. Experience does not take place at the level of non-duality. Meaning, you can't experience non-duality. And you can't experience non-duality because to experience means there should be an experiencer and an experienced. So at the level of non-duality, there's no experiencer, there's no experience, there's only one reality. So we need to understand that when we're talking about experience, we are confining our discussion to this worldly realm. So if you ask why, and Om Prakash goes on to ask, so why does this world, I'll paraphrase, why does non-duality express itself as duality? I'm paraphrasing Om Prakash's question. And it ends up being an invalid question, because why is we've been through this before, some of you will remember. Why does non-duality become dual? This is a question. The question why is an inquiry into cause-effect relationships. Cause-effect relationships belong only to the world of duality. With regard to non-duality, there's no such thing as cause-effect relationships. So to ask why or how non-dual Brahman becomes the world of names and forms is an invalid question. Because Brahman doesn't do anything. Brahman never did anything. Brahman didn't cause anything. Brahman is neither a cause nor effect. There is no causation with regard to non-dual Brahman. So if you ask that question from the level of the world, we can answer that. And so we have to look very closely at these questions. Okay. I've got a lot of questions left. Let's just take one more. Oh, this is a little bit like what we were talking about. Maybe we should take something different then. Okay, this is the last question. This is good. This is Amar. It doesn't say where Amar is from. All right. Amar asks, after personal discovery of our true nature in the empirical world, so in this life, in this world, a person discovers, I am Satchitananda Atma. Why is there such an intense desire to help people around us to follow any of the spiritual paths or practices and get the same realization of oneness and hence become free from suffering and anything whatsoever? And he says at the end here, Amar from Uttar Pradesh. Good. Just to let the question, just to paraphrase the question and make it very clear. When somebody gets enlightened, why do they, and let me paraphrase, if somebody gets enlightened, why do they profess their realization to others and help others gain the same realization and become free from suffering? Why are they, and he says, intense desire. Why does an enlightened person have an intense desire to help others become enlightened? If there's an intense desire to help others become enlightened, do you think this person is enlightened? I thought enlightenment means to become free from this intense desire, raga dvesha. So this intense desire is an emotional commitment. It's compulsivity. We call it raga in Sanskrit. Raga dvesha, the compulsion to get what you want and to run away from what you don't want. So if someone has a compelling interest in converting you so that you will be free from suffering, by definition, that person is not enlightened if they are compelled to do that. And this is the proselytization we see in Christianity and some other religions. They are compelled, in fact, some of them are told by their pastors, go out and convert others. They're literally told to do that. So they won't use those words. They say, spread the good word, the word of God. Help your neighbors. Good. I'm not sure how altruistic all that is, but that's a side topic. Here, if someone is truly enlightened, this is an important point. We'll end with this observation. Someone who's truly enlightened has no agenda. My guru liked to use that word, and I find it really suitable, really appropriate. An agenda means when you feel driven to do something. Driven means intense desire, as Amar says. And that feeling of being driven, I have to do this. Why? Because I have to. It's an emotional drive. And certainly for our Christian friends, they feel that emotional drive to convert others. I'm not sure if any of our Christian friends are enlightened. Probably not. But an enlightened person will not have that compulsivity, that emotional drive or intense desire. The basic, and this comes in not scriptures as much as commentaries, why do enlightened beings teach? And the answer comes again and again, because you ask them to. If no one asked, they wouldn't. If you didn't come here for class, I'd have a day off. If you didn't watch all these videos, I would stop producing videos. Why bother uploading if no? So it's very simple and pragmatic. An enlightened person has no personal investment or interest in teaching or anything else. So by implication, that suggests that somebody who has an agenda to uplift the world with these spiritual teachings, someone who has discovered spiritual teachings that they feel are so amazing, so pure, so powerful, and they feel this emotional commitment, they have to share it with others. They have to bring upliftment to the masses. To me, all of this suggests someone who is not enlightened, because there is an agenda, there is a personal interest, there is some kind of drive. Of course, sometimes it's just obvious. They want disciples, they want money, but setting all that aside, assuming that they're free from these kinds of problems, even still, the emotional investment in uplifting the masses suggests to me a personal need, an intense desire, and therefore maybe that person is not enlightened. Okay, this will be a good place to conclude today. We'll end with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavit Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om That's it. See you next time.